Hello ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to Astrology for Beginners. This is video number 6 of 20 to be done in the series of Astrology for Beginners, and they'll all be placed in the playlist on my channel. Very easy to find because it'll just be labeled Astrology for Beginners, and each video will be placed in there and you can dive in and pick and choose as to what may take your interest from time to time. Well, today we're going to look at the nodes of the Moon, Uranus, Neptune and Pluto, the symbols for each of those, and to see if there is anything spiritual in relation to those, just as there was the very spiritual underpinnings of the classical planets that we've previously looked at. Let's look first at the nodes of the Moon. What on earth are the nodes of the Moon? Well, for centuries the seers have thought, particularly in the East, that there must be more in the heavens than just the classical planets. The classical planets are the Sun, Mercury, Earth, Moon, Mars, Jupiter and Saturn. The nodes of the Moon are not actually physical planets, rather they are points in space, and the best way to give you the heads up as to what a node of the Moon is to imagine this as being the Earth, nice and green is good, and here we have the Sun, which appears to make its revolution around the Earth throughout the year. So that's the Sun's path. Then of course the Moon circulates the Earth, doesn't it? Every 28 days, and it takes a path around the Earth which is a little bit different to that of the Sun. It goes up and across the Sun's path and down again. Well, where the path of the Moon is on the ascendant going here, and where it crosses the path of the Sun, that's called the North Node of the Moon. The North Node of the Moon is two circles with a sort of an arc placed between them. And then when the Moon's orbit takes it down below the revolution path of the Sun, that's known as the South Node of the Moon. They're also known as Rahu and Ketu in Vedic astrology. When I say Vedic astrology, it was called Vedic astrology from about the 1970s when the hippies discovered India in the 60s and the 70s. But prior to that, and in my book, it's known as Hindu astrology. So the nodes of the Moon are actually points in space. And what they deal with, the South Node of the Moon, you'll very often see the North Node of the Moon on a birth chart, and rarely do you see the South Node. The South Node is about dealing with karma. It's about dealing with those things from the past or past lives which need to be worked out for your spiritual journey. And the North Node is about dealing with things to come. So you look to see what houses they are placed in. You remember the discussion of the houses in the first video? There'll be more discussion of houses in videos to come. You look to see what are the positions of the North and South nodes and what houses they're in, and that will tell you about the work that you need to do. For example, the North Node of the Moon could be in house number 10, which is about career, public image, legacies and things to do with that, which means you have work to do in that area. So they're the nodes of the Moon, the symbols for them. Now, is there any particular spiritual aspect to them? Not really. My own personal view is I distrust the nodes of the Moon. They bring about eclipses, and I'll talk more about eclipses in a future episode. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to look at the planet Uranus. Now, Uranus was discovered in 1781, so it's only a relatively new planet. It is not part of the Hindu system by and large. It is it's not known as one of the classical planets, and it doesn't have with it the wealth of information that relates to the classical planets and the signs which were all worked out over a period of thousands of years. Now, there are two signs, symbols that you may see for Uranus, and they're these. The circulation of Uranus, incidentally, around the Sun is every 84 years, and so it spends about 7 years in each sign. The outer planets, the importance of the outer planets is really more contextual, I think, as I mentioned in the last episode. Their importance really comes about through their transits across signs. And in the case of Uranus, the transit across a particular sign will take about 7 years. Now, just as there was the North Node and the South Node, two things to look at, I think there's also two things to look at in relation to each of these outer planets, which are called transpersonal planets. They're not really personal. They don't have an effect, a personal material effect on you day to day as the inner planets do. But they are out there and they are used by astrologers, so that's why we're discussing them. Now, if we look at these two symbols, remember, this was discovered in 1781, this planet, and everyone's saying, well, we better come up with some symbols for them. Well, there's the symbol for the Sun and there's the symbol for Mars, the arrow for Mars. Is there anything particularly spiritual about that? Personally, I don't think so. Same as here, there is here the usual circles for spirit, the cross of matter, and here we have two semicircles outward facing in the form of almost like satellite dishes. For reception, you might say, but I think that's really about as far as you can take it. Most often, the sign that you will see is this one. That's the one that you'll most often see in astrology charts. That's all I want to say about Uranus. Uranus is very much about, it's about first level of consciousness. There is the absolute consciousness, which is contained with the divinity. And then what we have is we have a first level of consciousness where we become aware of ourselves. And so what I would suggest when you see Uranus in your birth chart is to look at the opposite side of the chart as well, because Uranus actually is asking you to express your individuality in relation to the matters in the house that's there, and looking at the opposite house, that will also give you some assistance, some support, if you like. If you start to work on those things as well, they'll work in tandem. As I say, in my estimation, these outer planets work very well in duality of house systems. Now, the next symbol is that of Neptune. The symbol itself is quite unremarkable in the sense that it is using some signs that we have seen before. Now, what's interesting about Neptune is, and here's the sign itself for Neptune, quite straightforward. Across, as we see, we're used to that, particularly in Venus and other signs, spirit, matter, and these points upwards. Look, the planet was discovered in 1846 by a Frenchman by the name of Urbain. What a good name, Urbain Le Verrier. And he actually suggested that the planet should be called after him. And why not? That's what any good Frenchman would do. And why wouldn't you if you'd been smart enough to discover a new planet? Anyway, these things got sorted out by different bodies around the world, and the committee came up with a decision, if you like, to deny poor Urbain his everlasting glory, and they chose instead to go with Neptune, on the basis, I suppose, that all the other planets had references to the names of Roman gods in Roman mythology, so let's go and pick one as well, and we'll call it Neptune. And what was Neptune known for? He was known for a trident. Well, what can I say about that? Neptune is talking about, well, given that the name came up with committee, by a committee, there then needed to be a symbol for it. So you might ask yourself, was there any evolutionary spirituality developed over thousands of years to come up with the symbol? And the short answer, as you would understand, is no. But it's important because it is used in astrology. Now, to give it its due, we have down here again the cross of spirit into matter and the points of Mars. I personally don't think that they really have application to the planet. One might say of each of these things here that they represent birth, life and death, or mind, body and spirit, or past, present and future. You might say that. You might. But I probably wouldn't myself. What I do think, though, however, with Neptune is that it recommends that there is a need to connect with something that is greater than yourself. And so what you do is you look at the house that Neptune falls in your birth chart, and again you look at the opposite house to see what's there. Now, for example, I have Neptune in the 6th house, which is about, it's about work and routine. It's also about enemies and struggles and hardships. So I look to my 12th house, which is opposite the 6th house where Neptune is, which happens to be about secrets, the other world, clairvoyance and psychic awareness. Well, so it's not unusual, I suppose, in my case, is it, that should be the case. So when Neptune falls in your chart, it's asking you to connect with something that is greater than yourself. And in my case, yes, work, struggles and that, very often you have no alternative but to connect with those, but I can stretch to the opposite house and connect with, as I did from my teenage years, or from my childhood really, with the matters of the 12th house, which are of the hidden, the secret, and the psychic and clairvoyant. Finally, we're going to turn to Pluto. Now, Pluto is interesting, and I'll show you a couple of signs that are around for Pluto, and then you can make your mind up about it. Pluto was first really kind of, in a way, discovered by a guy called Percival Lowell in the United States in about 1909. It wasn't really till the 1930s that a group of 3 people, whose names just escape me at the moment, followed up on his work, stood on his shoulders, and went and actually then discovered Pluto. And so one of the signs for Pluto was this P, which turned into an L. Percival Lowell, or Lowell. Well, hardly very spiritual, is it? Hardly anything esoteric about that. So that is something that you do sometimes see. And then what you also see is, again, this cross with the arc that you see on the top of Mercury, for example, and just a disembodied spiritual sign there. And that's the one that you most often see. Now, you ask yourself, what is Pluto about? Well, Pluto is about the destruction of egocentric desires. So you ask yourself, which house does Pluto sit in my chart, and what egocentric or self-centered desires do I have in that, and what should I overcome in order to ensure that I have a fulfilling life, but also that I have spiritual advancement. One might, for example, have Pluto in the 10th house, which is about career, it's about public recognition, legacies, everything like that. And it might say, well, perhaps you're being a little bit self-centered about that. Maybe you're being self-indulgent. Maybe you're being too ambitious. Maybe you have an ego in relation to these things which needs to be broken down. So perhaps look to the opposite house, which is the fourth house, which is to do with family and family relationships. And ask yourself, do I really have the balance in my life? Should I see a psychologist to work through some of the things that this Pluto has brought up? In any event, they're the signs and symbols for the outer planets and the nodes of the moon. They are things that you will encounter in your astrology journey. So it was important that we discuss them, even though I do, from a practical point of view, probably myself assign more weight to the visible planets, that is from the sun out to and including Saturn, because they're stars that you see in the sky. The others are around. I mean, Pluto, for example, takes 248 years to go around the sun. So wherever Pluto is, it's not going to be moving anywhere fast in your time. Next video, we've done the signs, the symbols for the actual planets now, and next we're going to embark upon the star signs themselves. So the next video will include the symbology of Aries, Taurus, and Gemini, and I look forward to seeing you then. But until then, remember that you are a legend, and I look forward to seeing you again next time. Until then, it's bye for now.